The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. We're in this camera, right? 3. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from Chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is Chapter 1. I sit in a living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you. A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. But becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Monday. Let's start out the week with Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. There's so much going on. I'm sure that Congressman Khanna has a lot on his mind. I do on mine. And if you'd like to present him with your questions about what's going on, our telephone number, 202-808-9925. Congressman Khanna represents the 17th District of California. He is the, I believe you're the, what's your title with the Congressional Progressive Caucus? It's Vice Chair?
Vice Chair.
Vice Chair. Thank you very much. The Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And you can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A, and his website, khanna.house.gov. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So, boy, there's a lot going on. I understand, A, you've got a jobs bill for all coming up in Congress. B, the Medicare for All caucus. This is a big deal. I'm seeing stuff that indicates that the number one issue across America, regardless of party, is health care and concerns about the expense of health care. And that's a big deal. And I'm curious your thoughts on the president's tweets this morning.
Absolutely. Well, look, on the Medicare for All, this is the most momentum we've had in Congress on this issue for really. We've had 70 members nearly sign up for Medicare for All. And the idea is that this is, as you know, pro-jobs, and it's going to save costs. I mean, one of the things that infuriates me, I was doing a interview on Fox News this weekend, and they said, well, do you realize Medicare for All is going to cost $32 trillion? And I said, well, that number doesn't mean anything unless you compare it to our current system, which costs $49 trillion. So actually you would save $17 trillion, which makes sense because you would get rid of the private insurance costs. You would get rid of the costs that pharmaceuticals are charging. You would get rid of the hospital fees. And, of course, this is everyone in the caucus believes you should have health care from the day you're born. You shouldn't have it contingent of filling out forms or fighting with a bureaucrat. So I am very optimistic. Pramila and Mark Pocan have done a terrific job starting the caucus. We had a great press conference with a lot of enthusiasm. And I really am hoping that this eventually becomes part of the standard Democratic platform, not just the progressive platform.
Cool. And your Jobs for All bill, tell me about that. Jobs
for All is a very simple point, which is that we need to help people in places of large unemployment get a job. This calls for a subsidy of a person's wage, as well as a subsidy for them to get a credential. You have a program like this in Germany. Basically, the government helps pay the wage for an individual to get a job as a teacher in the government, for a small business, and it gets them an opportunity to work with a good wage. One of the things that when you talk about the 3.8% unemployment rate or the stock market growth, that just gets lost in the discussion is most people have not had in wages, and their costs are going up, and people don't have good jobs. And this program makes sure that people will have the opportunity for a good job, and it also is something that will make sure we deal with the geographic inequality and geographic divide. There's certain places that still have 8, 9, 10% unemployment.
Great. And finally, and then we'll pick up your calls for you if that's all right with you. I'm curious your thoughts on Donald Trump's tweets this morning in all caps threatening the president of Iran. It seems like, I mean, Rouhani is the reformer, and it seems like by going all hard right on him, what Trump is doing is emboldening, on the one hand, the hard right forces in Iran, which is not broadly a good thing for us, and also diminishing the power of the moderates who are trying to bring Iran into the 21st century.
Well, putting aside the juvenile nature and the dangerous of threatening war on Twitter, which was said that this administration is marching us towards confrontation with Iran, and I've been more concerned about getting into a war with Iran than even the situation in North Korea. I mean, they came in, they undermined the Iran deal. They have strengthened an alliance with Saudi Arabia. They have admitted that they are sending troops into, or sending part of the troops mission even in Syria. The Special Operation Forces are to contain Iran. Tillerson had said that. So you have Pompeo and Bolton, in Bolton's case, someone who's been itching for a confrontation with Iran for the past 20 years, and they're setting this up to draw us into another war, which is why I have said, and Barbara Lee and others, that the Democrats right now need to be very, very clear, that we need to be unified, and every Democrat should be absolutely clear that we will not support any invasion or hostilities or strike into Iran, so that we're not divided the way the Democratic Party was divided when they rushed us into war in Iraq.
Yeah. Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here. David in Columbus, Ohio. David, thanks for listening. You're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. Since California leads the nation, I think either single-payer health care or free college education would be a good demonstration project for California. And that was going to happen, but then it got sidetracked somehow. Can you explain what happened?
Well, I agree with you that it would be a good program nationally, and certainly in California. Pat Brown, our governor, built the state based on a funding of the UC, University of California system, and the California state system to provide affordable education. And now that's no longer the case. I mean, the UCs cost $20,000-$30,000 a year, and even California state universities cost about $10,000 a year. The funding is the issue in California. We right now are, unfortunately, there's an initiative to repeal the gas tax, which would deprive the state. I oppose that, but it's an issue that would starve us from revenue. People have been unwilling to raise the taxes on the top earners, and they've been unwilling to revise Prop 13 that restricts any taxation on property, including commercial property, that we would need for as a source of revenue to do things like free public college. So it's an issue of values, and the California legislature being willing to raise the revenue.
Yeah. Congressman, just FYI, I'm guessing you're talking to us on a cell phone because every other sentence or so we miss 2 or 3 words. They're dropping out. I don't know if there's...
I'm on a landline.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I am. But let me move to a different room.
Maybe it's a VoIP landline or something like that. Whatever it is. Anyway, I just thought I'd give you a heads up if
I appreciate that. Hopefully,
you can improve the signal. Okay, Mark in Albany, New York, listed on Sirius XM. You're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Congressman Ro Khanna and Tom, how are you this morning? My question is very simple. A lot of the smoke screen about what the president is doing takes away from other issues, too, that the Republicans are trying to do. I just heard a recent report that they're going to try to do some more gutting of Medicare and Medicaid. Have you heard anything about, plans by the Republican right to really go after Medicare and Medicaid before this next election?
I don't think I do know they want to go after Medicare and Medicaid. I don't think they're going to do it before the election. What I do think they're going to do is further tax cuts. I think in the fall they're going to try to make this awful tax package they passed permanent. And they're talking about a further reduction in the capital gains tax rate. And we have to be prepared to fight them on that issue. What they accuse us always of wealth redistribution, but what their tax plan is doing is taking money from hardworking individuals and really redistributing it by having hedge fund owners and private equity owners pay a reduced tax rate by reducing capital gains further and not charging ordinary income. So that's really been their agenda.
Yeah, and it's remarkable. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour, 202-808-9925. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's a brand new week, and Congressman Ro Khanna is answering your questions on the air. Stick around. And welcome back. Frank, watching us on Free Speech TV in Jacksonville, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. I would like to ask the congressman. We've been hearing that no one is above the law, and then on the other hand, you hear all these scholars and lawyers saying that the president can't be indicted. Now that's a bit confusing. Can you clear that up a little for me?
Well, I disagree with that interpretation. I mean, I think that everyone is obligated to be under the law, and that if you commit a crime and a grievous crime, you should be able to be indicted. I mean, let's take the egregious case. Let's say the president murders someone. Are we going to say that just because he's president, he doesn't have to obey the criminal laws of this country? So I think that's a lot of apology and lawyering for something that should not be our law. Our law should be every person should be accountable, and you should be able to indict the president.
Ken in New Oxford, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Thank you for honoring the First Amendment, first of all, but I want to say that all he has to do is go after Pfizer Pharmaceutical, because these guys have been guilty of murder and billions of dollars they've been fined, and they continue to get away with it. That alone would be the solution.
Solution to what?
The solution to Medicare and Medicaid. It would take care of it.
I see. Congressman?
I mean, I agree with you. The pharmaceuticals have made out with crazy profits. It's one of the cost problems. I mean, the insurance companies have been part of it. The hospitals with their facility fees have been part of it. One of the things that I'm working on is legislation that would say that if an American is paying more than the average in 7 other industrialized countries, you take France, Canada, Britain, then automatically it should trigger that generic drugs are allowed in the market for that drug. So I think we need something dramatic in Congress that's going to really restrict the pharmaceuticals from the type of greed and profits that they've had.
Yeah, but they're kind of figuring a way around this. I take a very low dose of a relatively minor blood pressure medication. It's called candesartan. And it used to be like $7 a month to fill the prescription. And then like 2 years ago, they started some trials on this to use it to treat Alzheimer's, which is interesting. But all of a sudden, the price went up to over $100 a month to refill the prescription. And I said to the pharmacist, this is generic. And she said, yeah, but the generic is manufactured by the same company that makes the brand name, and nobody else makes it. So they've got complete price monopoly.
Yeah, no, I've heard of this, that the generics are becoming are having monopolistic practices as well, and obviously your anecdote and your personal experience supports that. I think we're going to need to make sure it's a competitive market of generics, that you can. One, you should be able to import drugs, so maybe you could import the generics from other countries, so it wouldn't just be. This
drug is actually manufactured in India, according to the package. So you would think that you should be able to bring it in from Canada, right?
But I guarantee you, they're not charging people in India $100. So
yeah,
is going on.
I guarantee you, indeed. Congressman Ro Khanna on the line with us. We'll be back with more of your calls for him right after this. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Andy in Cleveland, Ohio. Andy, you are on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Yeah, hello, Tom. Hello, Congressman. I'd like to talk to you about, I see Democrats get on TV and they talk about what the message should be for the upcoming election and for the presidential election. So I would like to give you a little advice that maybe you should combine Bernie Sanders' message and Martin Luther King's message, combine those two together, and whatever they talk about the end of war, take money out of politics, stuff like that, and combine those two messages together, maybe you have a successful run getting, all those people elected.
Sure. Who was the second person? Bernie Sanders and who
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King. Sure. I mean, look, I think you're absolutely right that we need to have a clear platform, Medicare for all, get corporate PAC money out of politics, end the foreign interventions, and not get us into more costly wars, have a massive infrastructure project, have a massive jobs program that we put people to work, and make sure that we are having real policies like expanding the earned income tax credit and the minimum wage to put more money in the pockets of the working class. That, to me, is our message. It seems to me what most Democrats want, and it has to be bold and deal with the economic stagnation of wages and the rising cost of living that ordinary Americans are facing. And I agree with you. I think we've been too tentative. We kind of have a lowest common denominator. Every candidate gets to pick what they want. I much rather we ran with a strong message and then let some candidates disagree if they don't stand for that.
Congressman, if I may follow up on that, this morning on MSNBC, Stephanie Ruhle, who does a morning show, I guess it's 7 a.m. here, whatever, or 6 a.m. She said, words to the effect of, you've got these far left Democrats who are saying, free health care, free education, that sounds great, but then, you got to pay for it, and there's no plan to pay for it. And when people figure this out, they're going to be, the Democratic Party is going to be in big trouble, or words to that effect. I'm curious how you respond to those kinds of comments.
Well, first of all, it's just not true that we wouldn't be able to pay for it. If you have a financial transaction tax of a modest amount, you would pay for making public college tuition free. If we hadn't spent the $2.5 trillion in war in Afghanistan and Iraq, we would have had a lot more money to pay for these things. But even given the current situation, you can end the corporate interest deduction for corporations. You can tax corporations on their offshore earnings. That both of those provisions would raise a great deal of revenue. And Medicare for All is cost saving. I mean, that's the main part to continue to emphasize, that it would cost $32 trillion compared to $49 trillion, and the savings will come in far lower costs because you're not going to have the markups by private insurance companies. You're not going to have the markups by pharmaceuticals. You're not going to have hospitals charging you for an MRI 1,000% more than if you got that MRI at a local doctor's office. So I think that the economics on all of this is to the progressives' advantage. And second point is it's actually what's going to lead to economic growth. We know that the investment in education is going to mean someone's going to have a higher earning potential. They're going to have more money in their pocket to spend. That's what's going to grow the economy.
Yeah, solid stuff. Tom, in Martinsburg, West Virginia, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. Pharmaceutical companies really aren't interested in curing diseases. It seems like the only thing they do is find drugs to treat the symptoms. If the diseases are cured, there goes their profits.
Is that a question?
No, that's just a comment. I'll wait for you guys to comment on it.
Congressman, your thoughts?
Well, look, here's what I find infuriating about pharmaceutical companies. Tom, you and I know that the vast amount of research to discover new drugs and to discover things that are going to cure people happens either at the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, or leading universities. And the people motivated to do that groundbreaking research are motivated not by money often. They want to win the Nobel Prize, or they want to get tenure at some university, or they want to get a grant. Out of a scale of 10, 1 out of 8 of that innovation happens by those individuals. Then you get a pharmaceutical executive. They go to these Wharton or Harvard MBA, and their whole job is to take the innovation that has already happened and figure out how to market it and capture all the rewards. So this argument that the pharmaceuticals need these profits to do the innovation is just false. What they're doing is capturing the profits that is coming out of public research money. And that is why what we need to do is make sure that if public tax dollars are paying for the universities, NIH, NSF, that are actually leading to the innovation, that the American people are benefiting and not paying these exorbitant fees which are going to pharmaceutical executives.
Yeah. By the way, that $32 versus $49 billion
trillion, yeah.
$1 trillion, excuse me, thank you. Is that over a decade?
That's over a decade. And it's Paul Waldman has a great piece, if people want to Google it, in the Washington Post, where he goes through the costs. And, on every conservative, they just were throwing out this $32 trillion number, and that's in a vacuum. I mean, obviously, healthcare costs money. It costs money to become a doctor and a nurse, and it costs money to have medicine. And so, obviously, it's going to cost money, but you have to look at the comparative money. You can't say Medicare for All is going to cost $32 trillion and not say what we're spending on healthcare now.
Right, and what we're spending right now is $49 trillion. That's astonishing. Thank you for those numbers. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour here on this beautiful Monday. We'll be back with more of your calls for him. You can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna, Khanna, and his website, khanna.house.gov.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking, he says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides. About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get him. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? This particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the 5th Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told him to be quiet, and the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, 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 de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, what's going on here? And Huey said, the same basic procedures that are supposed to go on. Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. Can I see that pistol there? One of the pigs said. No, you can't see it, Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, no, you can't see it. Huey said, no, you can't see the pistol, nor this, pointing to his rifle. And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it. Is that your pistol? He asked Huey. And I said, no, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol. I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, can I see it or not? So Huey said to me, I'll talk. And then he said to the pig, no, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it. Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not, the pig says. So I says, well, you can't see my pistol. The MFers tried to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, who the hell do you think you are? Look, damn it, Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, "Who the hell do you think you are?" In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, "We have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it." The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1. And you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped around into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. "Who do you think you all are anyway?" Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. "You move on down the street," said the pig. Huey started interrupting. "You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty." And these pigs, they listen to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line taking your calls for the hour. Congressman, you're still with us?
I am.
Okay. Alan in Northwest Indiana, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, my name is Alan. We have a high rate of unemployment, as you said, in our inner cities with primarily young men for decades. What have you done to instill training programs, and what will you propose to instill training programs in the future? Thank you. I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
Well, I, first of all, completely agree with you. We have very, very high unemployment in some of the inner cities. We also have, by the way, very, very high unemployment in rural areas. Some of the highest unemployment areas are in states that Trump carried. I've proposed two things. Now, Congress needs to pass it, but I have said that we need to provide subsidized employment with benefits to people to get them a start, to get them into the job market. They can be doing productive work. They could be doing things to help clean up our environment. For example, I read this recent article this weekend about people who were going and planting sea algae in the ocean to help reduce carbon. You can be doing a tremendous amount of public good and jobs in that area that we need. They could be doing things in the private sector, child care, or in technology or elder care. But we have to give them a start by having some subsidy on their wages and support services to get them into the job market. And Stephanie Kelton has written about this, Derek Hamilton. It's a matter of the political will that we need a president and a majority in Congress to pass it.
Tim in Hendersonville, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. And you need to turn your TV down.
Hello.
Hey, Tim. You're on the air.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I enjoy your show very much. I listen to it as often as possible. I think there's two things I'd like to mention. One, I think the Democrats who have been brutally dismantled in the marketing departments by being labeled as debt or as redistributing wealth, they should brand themselves and say, no, we're going to redistribute the debt. And if you look at the way debt is created and who holds on to the notes and who holds on to the debt in this country, I think that's a real important thing. So, look, we're not going to redistribute the wealth. We're going to redistribute the debt and make it so that the disparate have a better chance to take part in not owning the debt.
Okay. Your thoughts, Congressman?
Well, I think you're right that a lot of the debt is owned by hardworking folks, but I think what this wealth redistribution is the biggest farce for Republican description of Democrats, because the people who are redistributing the wealth are Republicans and their tax policy. They're explicitly taking money from hardworking Americans who are having to pay ordinary income tax and redistributing it to stockholders and investors who are getting huge tax breaks for either outsourcing or for having lower capital gains or carried interest rates. The entire tax plan is redistributing wealth from hardworking Americans to the investor class. I think what the Democrats need to say is we are restoring the basic belief in this country that you ought to make what you deserve, and that we're going to be giving people a raise because the money has been sucked up out of the working class and middle class to the investor class.
Ivan in Chicago, listening to WCPT. Ivan, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, Congressman. Yes.
Good morning.
I'm calling about the donut hole. Can you explain briefly how it works and what could be done to fill it other than Medicare for all, which, of course, would be a beautiful thing?
Well, the donut hole, as I understand it, is that there is a amount where you're covered for prescription drugs and others. Then there is a amount after you cross a certain threshold where you're not covered. And then again, you become covered if you have something catastrophic. But what this means is if you have a chronic illness or you really need medicine for cholesterol or for diabetes or for asthma, that many people have to end up paying a lot out of pocket. Obviously, there are things we can do to fix it. Congress just needs to fund more the coverage of prescription drugs and allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drugs so that they would bring the cost down. But I think ultimately a Medicare for all is the type of comprehensive solution that this country needs.
Tyrone in Harlem, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, how you doing, Tom? How you doing, Congressman?
Good.
I was wondering what could be done to stop this archaic, backwards law that I feel is racially motivated. That stand your ground law. You know, even back in the Wild West, if you shot an unarmed man, it was against the law. You would have to go to jail for it. We have gone back so far back that the law even defines what was going on in the lawless Wild West. If this law spreads, all it's going to do is bring our country back to the time when you could just indiscriminately kill someone and say you were afraid, and that's justification.
Congressman?
Well, I definitely think we need to relook at some of these laws that have led to too much of tolerance for killing, and that it needs to be a very, very high standard. I mean, I would have to look state by state, but I don't think that we ought to give people allowance to kill unless there's just absolutely extraordinary circumstances. And in many of these laws, they probably are too permissive, just like our laws with police using lethal force need to be stricter. In my state, in California, there's a bill that may redefine the standard and really say that it can only be used if absolutely necessary. So I do think all of our laws, whether they're civilians or police, the use of lethal force should be heavily restricted.
What's the bill in California?
I don't remember the number, but they're relooking at the standard for what the use of force is, and they would make it a much stricter standard for the use of force. And so it's going right now through the California Assembly. The ACLU is behind it, and I think it would restrict basically police from a deadly force. The standard would be one that would be much, much harder. It would say where it's necessary to prevent serious bodily injury, and it's not just when there's reasonable cause, but would specifically say it's a necessity for preventing bodily injury or death.
Fascinating stuff. Speaking of California, Rob in San Diego, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman and Tom, you know, one of the big benefits of Medicare for All that nobody talks about is what a huge relief of a burden it would be for employers not to be shopping for insurance. I mean, and administering open enrollments, et cetera. Not only that, the lower costs of Medicare for All will help make every employer more competitive around the world.
Thank you for making that point. You're absolutely correct, and I'll tell you, representing Silicon Valley, I hear this all the time from companies and startups. There are 2 points to it. The stagnation of wages of employees is directly tied to the increase in healthcare costs. If you had taken the same money that companies right now are having to pay in healthcare premiums, and if they had put that money instead to employees, you wouldn't have the stagnation of wages that we've had in the middle class. And secondly, to your point, one of the biggest things that restricts people from moving from job to job or changing jobs is that their health care is tied to their employment. And if we change that, it would make things much more competitive. It would allow employees much more flexibility to leave, which would actually increase wages. So I really appreciate how you're framing this, because I think the progressives, we should not hesitate to point out the competitive and pro-growth advantages of Medicare for all.
Jordan in Durham, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
Hey, Congressman. How you doing?
Good.
Congressman, I have one question. I'm a young African American young man, and I've been struggling with Social Security, and I just wanted to comment about that and jobs.
What do you mean by I've been struggling with, Jordan? Do you mean
like I've been struggling to get in college, and
I appreciate that, and I would say two things. One, obviously there is still systematic racism and challenges, particularly, I mean, I'm Indian American, but I think when you're African American, there's no community that has faced more the brunt of racism and discrimination in this country. And so being clear-eyed that those challenges still exist. But I thought actually President Barack Obama was extraordinarily eloquent when he would go and speak to young African Americans, and he would say, these are the challenges. No, don't think that they don't exist. But you still have agency. You still can dream. You still can overcome those, and be confident to try to do your part, because generations before have done theirs. And so I'm serving in the Congress with John Lewis, who was beaten literally on the Edmund Pettus Bridge so that African Americans could vote. So I think just keep working to do your part and to make this a more just society.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents California's 17. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Dave in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, Tom and Congressman. One of the previous callers kind of stole my thunder. I was going to point out the benefits to the employers, since how most of our private insurance is employer-based. Also, I think one of the things, maybe the only point I'd make would be that part of your wages when you're employed, that goes to health insurance. So that would be able to give the employer the opportunity to pay you better and not have the burden, and also be able to make his products cheaper. And
you're absolutely right. I mean, forget stealing the thunder. We need every person making these points. I mean, the Republicans call this socialism, or they make you think that you're going to hurt the economy. And you're absolutely right. This is such a good policy because it's the moral thing to do, but it's also the economically smart thing to do. It's why every other industrialized country has some version of it.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward here. Let's see here. I have a serious call. Oh, here we go. Andrew in Columbus, Ohio, listening on WGM. I can't see the last letter there.
WGRN. Hi, Congressman.
WGRN. You're on the air.
I just have a simple suggestion that would kill two birds with one stone, solve two problems with one act. I see people struggling to pay for college, and I see all these plastic bottles laying on the ground, and both these issues really kind of grind my gears. So how about a 2.5-cent deposit and a 2.5-cent tax on every plastic container and bag that's sold, and you take that 2.5-cent tax and you pay for people's post-high school training or college. over 1 million bottles a second are thrown away in this country, and we could just knock it out of the park. And that's my suggestion. Thank you.
It almost seems like too reasonable a suggestion to ever pass the Congress. I'm being a little sarcastic, but I think that's an intriguing idea. I mean, I think those are the types of ideas that we need to be doing in Congress. And to your point, there are a lot of ways we can raise the revenue to help pay for college education, and it's not that we don't have the money or the ability to raise the revenue to do that.
Yeah. And let's see here, Mike in Northeast Ohio, listening or watching on YouTube Live. We have just a minute to the break. Mike, a real quick question for Congressman Khanna.
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. I used to listen to the Limbaugh back in the 90s, and their biggest thing for the tax decrease was to have health insurance for the employees because the employers were paying too much and they needed to be more competitive in the marketplace. So how can we turn that back around into what they got?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, I think your callers the show have just been terrific because you're pointing out the competitive disadvantage to employers of the current healthcare system. I mean, you're absolutely right. They used to complain, conservatives, that this is making our businesses less competitive. They're not being able to compete. And the answer to that is to have a Medicare for all and not to burden small businesses and companies with healthcare costs.
Yeah, and we've come a long way here since John Conyers first submitted House Bill 676, as I recall.
Yeah, no, John Conyers was, of course, a visionary in terms of putting that forward, and he and Bernie have been talking about this 15, 20 years. But now you've got the majority of the Democratic caucus on the bill.
That is great. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls for him. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Janelle in Port St. Lucie, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. I'm calling because I want to know if anything's being done about medical marijuana. I am currently on it. I had a serious auto accident that caused me severe nerve damage, and I've been on all kinds of medications and different levels of opiates as far as that's concerned. Last November, I started medical marijuana. In November, I was able to come off the opiates 100%. Now, the problem is that the doctor that I go to is a licensed MD, but I cannot put her office visit through Medicare or Medicaid, Medicare or my insurance company. Also, medical marijuana is extremely expensive, and that's another charge that I cannot put through Medicare or through my insurance company for coverage. And I was wondering what's being done about helping people out like me.
Great
question. Ma'am, I really appreciate your sharing your story. If you have the time and can call my office today or tomorrow, I would be willing to share this story. I would love to highlight it because Barbara Lee and myself and Cory Booker have a bill to legalize marijuana in this country, to not make it a Schedule I drug. As you point out, it would actually help with the opioid crisis. It would help economically. There are a lot of medical benefits, and we need citizens like you to be able to share their stories. So I really appreciate it. There is legislation in Congress on this, and we need to just continue to get support for it.
Michael in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I was calling to find out what the congressman's position was in support of cannabis legalization. The lady preceding me took care of that issue, obviously. Moving forward, I'm wondering what is it that the majority of the Democratic committee representing all 50 states can do to come online and share the same perspective of legalization and be outspoken within their candidacies in their local primaries, et cetera. In California recently, one Democratic person stated in opposition to the in favor of legalization from a RNC member that they didn't want to legalize. I mean, it seems like a disconnect within the DNC party. Your thoughts, please?
Well, I think there are three very good arguments for legalization. One is it's economically a smart thing to do. It's going to create huge industries and jobs. Two, it actually can help avert some of the opioid crisis. It's much better and safer to use medical marijuana and use marijuana for things that people are using worse drugs or more addictive drugs for. And finally, there's a racial disparity angle to it. I mean, if you're bluntly young and white and you try marijuana, you're probably not going to have your life ruined. If you're a young African American or Latino American, and particularly in the inner cities or urban areas, and you do that, you may have your life ruined in a criminal record. So it's a racial justice issue as well. And I think particularly with young voters, it's a major issue, and it should be something that every Democrat supports.
I'd add a fourth one to that. That is that it breaks the back of organized crime. We saw this with when we ended alcohol prohibition in the 30s, and it put John Dillinger's contemporaries all out of business.
That's a great point.
Yeah. In fact, I think that's one of the major motivators for like what Portugal did. Pat in Seattle. Hey, Pat, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna. This is really a comment about the universal health care. I've been married 60 years. I'm divorced. No, not divorced. I'm widowed. But I tolerated 60 years of physical and verbal abuse, and I could not leave my husband because I needed the insurance. I had underlying medical problems, and his employment, I could get the insurance from him. I could not leave him because I would be unable to get it on the open market.
Well, I appreciate your sharing your story, and I can't imagine how difficult that was. But this is why we need to make it very clear. You should have health care in this country the day you are born or the day that you become American. I mean, that is just should be a basic right of living in a civilized nation. So that you don't have to worry about conditions of how you get health care in making life choices.
Deanna in Redding, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, hello, Congressman Khanna. I just wanted to make a point that if we have Medicare for all in this country and if 200 million people pay $100 a month, like people on Medicare and Medicaid do now, or Medicare do now, how much money are you bringing in every month? And I think that would more than cover the health care coverage in this country. And you can take out all of the insurance, and you can take out a lot of the medical overcosts or overheads that doctors' offices and hospitals have to pay. And yeah, it would put a few people out of jobs, but they could be retrained in jobs that would really help people instead of insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies.
You're absolutely right, and you're explaining in very simple and thoughtful terms how you get the $32 trillion for Medicare for all versus the current health care, which is $49 trillion, and how you save $17 trillion because you are taking out a lot of the costs, as you point out. Now, one of the things people say is, well, you're going to have to pay some tax or $100 a month or $200 a month. And what they omit is, but right now people are paying nearly $1,000 often a month or $600 a month to their private insurance companies, and that cost won't be there. So almost every American who chooses this option would save money.
Yeah, it's remarkable. We have just 15 seconds here, Congressman. What should we be looking at this coming week here?
Well, I think we're going to continue the appropriations fights. I mean, remarkably, the Republicans still are not funding things for election safety or election integrity. They're continuing to gut the EPA and different agencies, and so we're going to be fighting hard for that. And then we're still really fighting for these kids to be united. It was just done in such callous disregard that you still have kids separated from their parents, and there hasn't been a significant effort enough effort, in my opinion, to reunite them. And so many of us are going to continue to push for that this week.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Johann Hari's brand new book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. So he starts out talking about how he had been on antidepressants for most of his life, from his teenage years into his 30s. And then he says, then when I was 31 years old, I found myself chemically naked for the first time in my adult life. For almost a decade, I had been ignoring my therapist's gentle reminders that I was still depressed despite my drugs. It was only after a crisis in my life, when I felt unequivocally terrible and couldn't shake it off, that I decided to listen to him. What I had been trying for so long wasn't, it seemed, working. And so when I flushed away my final packs of Paxil, I found these mysteries waiting for me, like children on a train platform waiting to be collected, trying to catch my eye. Why was I still depressed? Why were there so many people like me? And I realized there was a third mystery hanging over all of it. Could something other than bad brain chemistry have been causing depression and anxiety in me and in so many people all around me? If so, what could it be? Still, I put off looking into it. Once you settle into a story about your pain, you're extremely reluctant to challenge it. It was like a leash I had put on my distress to keep it under control. I feared that if I messed with the story I'd lived with for so long, the pain would be like an unchained animal and would savage me. Over a period of several years, I fell into a pattern. I would begin to research these mysteries by reading scientific papers and talking to some of the scientists who wrote them. But I always backed away because what they said made me feel disoriented and more anxious than I had been at the start. I focused on the work for another book, Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs instead. It sounds ridiculous to say I found it easier to interview hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels than to look into what causes depression and anxiety. But messing with my story about my emotions, what I felt and why I felt it, seemed more dangerous to me than that. And then finally, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. So over a period of 3 years, I went on a journey of over 40,000 miles. I conducted more than 200 interviews across the world with some of the most important social scientists in the world, with people who had been through the depths of depression and anxiety, and with people who had recovered I ended up in all sorts of places I couldn't have guessed at in the beginning. An Amish village in Indiana, a Berlin housing project rising up in rebellion, a Brazilian city that had banned advertising, a Baltimore laboratory taking people back through their traumas in a totally unexpected way. What I learned forced me to radically revise my story about myself, my story about the distress spreading like tar over our culture. I want to flag up right at the start 2 things that shape the language I'm going to use through all of this book. I'm reading from the introduction. Both were surprising to me. I was told by my doctor that I was suffering from both depression and acute anxiety. I had believed those were separate problems, and that is how they were discussed for the 13 years I received medical care for them. But I noticed something odd as I did my research. Everything that causes an increase in depression also causes an increase in anxiety, and the other way around. They rise and fall together. It seemed curious, and I began to understand it only when, in Canada, I sat down with Robert Kohlenberg, a professor of psychology. He, too, once thought that depression and anxiety were different things. But as he studied it for over 20 years now, he discovered, he says, that the data are indicating that they're not distinct. In practice, quote, the diagnoses, particularly depression and anxiety, overlap, end quote. Sometimes one part is more pronounced than the other. You might have panic attacks this month and be crying a lot next month. But the idea that they're separate in the way that, say, having pneumonia and having a broken leg are separate is not borne out by the evidence. Robert's side of the argument has been prevailing in the scientific debate recently. In the past few years, the National Institutes of Health, the main body funding medical research in the United States, has stopped funding studies that present depression and anxiety as different diagnoses. They want something more realistic that corresponds to the way people are in actual clinical practice, he explains. I started to see depression and anxiety as like cover versions of the same song by different bands. Depression is a cover version by a downbeat emo band, and anxiety is a cover version by a screaming heavy metal group. But the underlying sheet music is the same. They're not identical, but they're twinned. The second insight comes from something else I learned as I studied these 9 causes of depression and anxiety that he writes about in this book. Whenever I wrote about depression and anxiety in the past, I started by explaining one thing. I am not talking about unhappiness. Unhappiness and depression are totally different things. There's nothing more infuriating to a depressed person than to be told to cheer up or to be offered jolly little solutions as if they were merely having a bad week. It feels like being told to cheer up yourself by going out dancing after you've broken both your legs. But as I studied the evidence, I noticed something that I couldn't ignore. The forces that are making us depressed and severely anxious are, at the same time, making even more people unhappy. It turns out that there is a continuum between unhappiness and depression. They're still very different in the same way that losing a finger in a car accident is different from losing an arm, and falling over the street is different from falling over the cliff. But they are connected. The book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is political analyst, historian, and journalist Thomas Frank, founder of The Baffler magazine, author of numerous books, including What's the Matter with Kansas's latest book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. His website, tcfrank.com, and you can tweet him at Thomas Frank. Thomas Frank, welcome back to the program. Thomas? He can't hear me. Oh my.
Sure, call him back.
Okay, so I'm going to yeah, there you go. Sure, call him back. I'm going to put I'm going to pick up a phone call here while we're waiting for Thomas Frank to connect with us. James in Spokane. Hey James, you had what's up? Thanks for calling.
Yeah, it's very hard for us people, us plain folks, to get control of these morbidly wealthy people. Is there some way we probably should legislate that these guys be audited annually beyond a certain income?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Shouldn't we be auditing these morbidly wealthy people annually
as far as trying to keep them honest and upright?
I don't think you're ever going to be able to successfully keep, particularly the morbidly wealthy, honest and upright with regard to taxes and whatnot. It just, doesn't seem like something that happens. The way to do it, James, in my opinion, is to have a top tax rate that's, a reasonable tax rate, so that.
Well, sure. In lieu of that, though, they can't be audited. Wouldn't that do something to keep them more honest? I mean, we'd have better idea of what they're doing, how nefarious they're acting.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree with that, James. And one of the things that we recently learned is that Thomas Frank, we can put Thomas Frank, is that the Trump administration has rerouted assets at the IRS, the Treasury Department, away from auditing high-wealth individuals and toward auditing low-income individuals, bizarrely. On the line with us, Thomas Frank. As I mentioned earlier, Thomas is the political analyst, historian, journalist, founder of the Baffler magazine, author of numerous books, including What's the Matter with Kansas, and his latest Rendezvous with Oblivion, reports from a sinking society, tcfrank.com. You can tweet him at thomasfrank.com. Thomas, welcome back.
Mr. Thom Hartmann.
How are you?
I'm glad to hear your voice.
Well, thank you. Back at you. Rendezvous. This is Rendezvous with Oblivion. This is serious stuff we're talking about here.
Well, you say it's serious stuff. Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
but done with a certain amount of humor. Yeah. So it's a play on Franklin Roosevelt's phrase when he said this generation is a rendezvous with destiny. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what to tell you, Tom. I'm very unhappy with the state of life in the United States, and it's not just about Donald Trump. So the book is a collection of essays going back about 10 years, in which I document. It's mainly about the sort of the intellectual guardians of the public interest and how they have failed. This is something that my eyes were open to during the financial crisis, and that I started caring about and really paying attention to in the years that followed. And they're just across the board failure, and yielding us the world that we live in today. So Trump is kind of the culmination of the book, not the beginning of the critique. But the weird thing, Tom, is I go back over essays that I've written over the years, and you've read many of them. You read many of them when they came out, but I basically forgot about those essays as soon as I wrote them, and as soon as they were published, I just forgot about them. And then I went back and was looking at them, and everything pointed to Trump. It was just the weirdest thing in the world.
Wow. I would, it has occurred to me, and in fact, actually, my book that Hachette poorly titled "The Crash of 2016," starts with the Powell memo in 1971 as the turning point when the hard right reached out to the business community and then they integrated themselves into each other, and then Powell got put on the Supreme Court, and then you got the Buckley decision in '76. Powell was put on the Supreme Court in '72, or 70, maybe 73, whatever. And boom, that leads right to Citizens United, and then you got a billionaire oligarch running Fox News Network, Rupert Murdoch standing up for billionaire oligarch Donald Trump, and all these guys who helped fund the Heritage Foundation and others saying things like we don't want people to vote, the famous quote from what's his name. So
yes.
And it seems like the high water mark was Reagan's election, when he could actually put this stuff into law, and nobody has reversed it. We're still living in Reagan's world. What do you think of that analysis?
That's right. Well, you got to have a second political party if you want to do that.
How so?
I mean, you have to have a party that opposes.
Oh, well, this is your book, Listen Liberal.
If you want to reverse it. I'm sorry. I'm so cynical. I'm like the Hobbesians.
No, I get it, but this is your book, Listen Liberal, which you and I talked about on this program.
I know it. It's so frustrating. Everything you just said is exactly true, and I remember when this stuff was happening in the 1980s, and it was shocking to me at the time, and I could see very plainly at the time in the 1980s where this was going if you allowed it to continue, and that is it's going straight to straight back to the 19th century.
Yeah.
And that is really where we are. And can I tell you something? And by the way, so Rendezvous with Oblivion documents all of these sort of different facets of the change that you're describing that you would never really think of. So there's several essays about the higher learning in the United States, the corporatization of the university, which is a really sinister story once you start looking into what's happened to higher learning in this country. And there's essays about architecture, about the McMansion. I do this one about the history. I'm very fond of this one. An essay about the history of the McMansion. I go to various presidential libraries, et cetera, et cetera. But the question that I have been thinking about a lot lately, and that I don't have an answer for, Tom, but that your monologue a minute ago got me thinking about again, is this: how does a society recover from an age of corruption?
Well, that was the essence. That was the essence of my book, Crash. And it's that, basically we've done this 3 times, and every time we did it, it followed a major economic disaster, which was then followed by a war. And the Great Crash of 1770 led to the American Revolution of 1776. The Great Crash of 1856 led to the Civil War of 1861. The Great Crash of 1929 led to the New Deal.
Sure.
Right. And I think that it's going to take another great crash. What do you think?
But we had it. We had it in
No,
a way.
we didn't,
That's the thing.
I mean, if that crash had happened 2 years into Bush's presidency instead of just 6 months before the end of it, it would have attached itself to him. And as it was, Obama got us out of it, and the Democrats got us out of it. But I don't think Americans realized how bad it was. They weren't.
They did. You're exactly right that they didn't realize. I mean, people were furious, and if you ask me, are still furious. So for people today, that is the foundational moment to a certain degree. That is the nightmare knowledge that lurks in the back of everyone's mind when they're, because it did expose the professional class as being profoundly corrupt. The Wall Street guys, the real estate appraisers, et cetera, the people that rate bonds. Everybody was on the take. Everybody was in on it, and then they all got bailed out. And that's the sort of nightmare knowledge that's behind everything that has come since.
And apropos,
by the way,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead. It's your show.
Right. Well, yeah, but it's about your book. In Listen Liberal, you made the point that the Republican Party represents the 1%, and the Democratic Party, as reinvented by the Clintons and the whole DLC thing back in the 90s, represents the top 10%. Nobody's representing the bottom 90%. And I think that's what you were referring to when you said, if you're going to push back on Reaganism, you need a new political party. But I see that emerging inside the Democratic Party, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Bernie Sanders to even so-called corporate Democrats now singing the tune. I mean, you've got now this new caucus, Medicare for All caucus, that just emerged.
Yeah, I know, it's great, isn't it?
I mean, good stuff is happening. It seems to me.
Those are really positive developments that you just described. Those are all like really great things. What's sad is that, and I keep coming back to this point because I'm fairly obsessed with it. But I think historically, that's just how my brain works. We thought we had that in 2008. We thought that's what we were choosing with Barack Obama, and we thought, or at least I thought he was the right man for the job, for the occasion.
I thought that's what we had in '92. I mean, go back and read. My book Threshold. I quote Clinton's entire New Covenant speech. I mean, he campaigned as FDR in '92.
I know, but he didn't have the financial crisis. I thought that was the turning point, and I thought that Obama would have to rise to the occasion, and instead we got what we got, and half measures in all things, and Republican Party bounced right back. The most incredible thing, you and I were talking about it at the time, the Tea Party movement. Look at what they're doing. You better get out there, Democrats. And because they're so allergic to populist outcry, they're so they want nothing to do with that kind of discontent. They're very uncomfortable around it. It doesn't come naturally to them anymore, and the rest is history, as they say. I mean, they left that up to the Tea Party movement and to Donald Trump to sort of fake
Yeah, it really seems to me, though, that all of this is changing. We're talking with Thomas Frank is changing. We're talking with Thomas Frank, his new book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. Thomas, we have just a minute until we're going to hit a hard break here, and we got to bail on this. Your thoughts on where we're going?
There's hopeful signs in the rising left wing of the Democratic Party. Very hopeful. On the other hand, I don't think Trump is going to be as big a pushover as people think. I think that there is something going on in this country, and I think mainstream Democrats don't get it. And I think it's a really, really ugly turn. When Trump and Bannon talk about making the Republican Party into a workers' party, they're not kidding. That really is the plan, and it's something that it's. Basically, it grows out of everything that you and I have been saying in our conversations over the years. It's entirely predictable that they would try to do this. Now, the Democrats, this is the moment. They have to stop these guys.
Yeah.
Well, let's see them do it.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep agitating if you will. Thomas Frank, his new book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. Thomas, thanks for dropping by today.
Oh, no problem, Tom. I love it.
Thanks. Always great talking with you. Yeah, the website, tcfrank.com. You can tweet him at Thomas Frank. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Pat in Seattle, listening on KBCS. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today? Pat?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Pat. What's up?
I have been wondering for a long time why the Democrats don't organize around the mission of climate change. You can do the jobs issue, the equality issue, the cultural issues between men and women. People need a mission, and we can make industries sustainable and have the right industries helping out the planet. What do you think?
I don't disagree with you, Pat. I think, though, that broadly we need to figure out exactly how to message this. Up until now, the messaging has been basically scientific. If we continue down this road, if we continue with climate change as it's going to lead to massive cultural, economic, and human disasters, and disasters for basically all life on the planet. I mean, we're looking at something that could be that bad. And so, we've got to do something about it. I think that that's actually starting to sink in. You're now getting a few Republicans who are talking about climate change in defiance of the Koch brothers. And people are starting to realize that it's, people like ExxonMobil and Koch Industries, that make their money with fossil fuels, that of course are going to be funding climate denying science and things. But I think the big thing that's happening right now that is going to help us is that you're getting, cities. My brother was visiting from Michigan over the weekend, and I grew up in, he and I and my other two brothers, we grew up in Michigan. Throughout my childhood, for all the years that I lived in Michigan, from 1951 to 1978, I have no recollection of any day that went over 100 degrees. I mean, it just, in Lansing, Michigan, it probably did once or twice, but it was so rare. You think three-digit, temperatures, that's Phoenix, Arizona. That's southern Texas. And now it's happening all over the country, and it's really hitting farmers, and it's really freaking out, people. It's gonna have a big impact on food prices here soon, and I think that it's reaching the point where it's unescapable. And so maybe we can just continue the economic or the climate disaster discussion, because frankly, that's the purest discussion around this. You're right, though. Empowering local people by solarizing their homes. Hawaii is running those ads now, the Hawaiian Power Company. We're going to have, all solar power in Hawaii or all renewable power in Hawaii. These are things that could be done. I think these are all good arguments that we can and should be making, Pat.
Right, and the Democrats have not educated the public about it as much as they could have.
They try really hard, Pat. It's just that the media, the corporate media in America, will not put, and we've had several Democratic politicians on this program complaining about this out loud on the air, will not put Democrats on the air unless they're willing to talk about Donald Trump.
Yeah, I know that.
Or Russia.
But I think the recognition is worldwide. Yeah. And it can have so many positive benefits that the Democrats are just not talking about. They get lost in the details. Yeah. And the science, you're right, isn't gonna persuade people.
Well, I think it may start to, and I think the fact that it's getting so damn hot out there is really starting to cause people to go, huh? Really? So we'll see where it goes. Pat, thanks for the call. We just need to keep up the messaging. We'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
With you, there's a bunch of stuff in the news that I wanted to get to and have not much had an opportunity so far at today's show. Now, of course, Donald Trump this morning threatening Iran with war. This is a rather startling and frankly tragic reality that our president is not a stable person, that he thinks, he blows up the Iran deal, which had them basically in a box. There was no country on earth that was more locked down with regard to nuclear weapons and the ability to use them than Iran, which has no nuclear weapons at all. And so he blows up that deal because it was negotiated by our country's first black president. And then when predictably Iran starts going, wait a minute, maybe we will start enriching uranium and stuff like that. Trump goes nuts. And Rouhani gave a speech yesterday in which he talked about, don't pull the tail of the tiger, don't take us on, Mr. Trump, because it'll be a bad thing. It would be the mother of all wars. And Trump sends this all caps. Never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences like which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. So now, apparently, we're now a country that projects our own violent words or demented words of violence and death. And amazing. And then Trump tweets a series of tweets, apparently based on Fox News lies, that lie about Carter Page and all this stuff. And so it's just, the whole thing is just nuts. Anyhow. It's not. Oh, it's not. Oh, okay. So there's that. And then there is, this is Jamal Abdi, Vice President of Policy of the National Iranian American Council. He says, Trump's crazed all-caps tweet threatening Iran with war last night underscores the danger of supporting the Trump agenda. Minutes after Secretary Pompeo called on the Iranian American community to support the administration's pressure campaign in Iran, Donald Trump proved what escalation with an unhinged president at the helm can lead to, a disastrous war. And that's, amen. Really well said. A new study, this Joan McCarter writing about it over at Daily Kos. When it comes to the economy, voters aren't buying Russian asset Donald Trump's tweets about how he's made it great again, probably because they're not seeing it and because their health care costs keep going up. And who's most worried about health care costs? 45 to 64-year-olds, 57% are concerned about health care costs. People living in rural areas, 54% concerned about health care costs. Women, 53% concerned about health care costs. Non-college educated whites, 52%. Overall, 49%. So half of America is concerned about health care costs. Great time for the Republican caucus to roll out the brand new Medicare for All caucus, which they just did. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of the news of the day, and I'll be picking up your calls after the break. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who was Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features the judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's even worse than you think, by David K. Johnston. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 5 people apparently have the goods on Paul Manafort. And last week, Special Counsel Mueller asked the judge, I believe, in the case, to grant immunity to those 5 people, which basically will force them to testify, will what's called compel their testimony, because they can no longer claim that their right of self-incrimination would be violated if they spoke up. So these 5 people have not just knowledge of a crime by Paul Manafort, but apparently guilty knowledge. That is to say, they share guilt in the crime or a crime or some crime that through which, by virtue of which, they know about guilt that Manafort has. So Manafort's got to be the big fish here that Mueller is going for, who could, take down the whole Trump crime family. And now he's got 5 people who are going to, they're going to be compelled to testify. This is just the way it's going to play out. Jill in Sebastian, Florida, or excuse me, Bill in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, good morning, Tom. I wanted to talk to the congressman, but I might as well talk to you about it. I was authorized for the hepatitis C medication the other day. I've known I had it since 2002, and it took but 3 weeks for me to get authorization for $80,000 worth of medication, right, with a copay of $8.60.
That's pretty good. Was that through your health insurance company, or was that through Medicare?
I would think it went through the Medicare, and I have to pick the medication up on the 31st. But I was absolutely amazed at how quickly it was done. Yeah.
Well, good luck with that, Bill. I've had several friends who have taken, I think Harvoni is the name of the drug, and successfully knocked out Hep C, and I think it's a fine thing. So, Doug in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Doug, what's up?
Hey, thank you, Tom, very much for what you do, and just I want to tell America, stay woke and get ready for impeachment.
There you go.
Hey, with your discussion with the congressman, I agree that we are not the congressman, but with the last
Thomas Frank.
Yeah, we do need a third party, and I put a plea out to anybody that's got a lot of money or media or a way that we name it the Citizens Alliance Party, and it's called CAP. And there's a lot of good advertisement there, like, cap their butt, cap this off, just we need to do that. We need to start
Here's the problem with that, Doug. Here's the problem. You've got two, basically, because we have first past the post, winner take all elections. And this is the conundrum that James Madison had when the Constitution was being ratified. If you have only two political parties, then you can get somebody elected with a majority, with 51% versus 49% on the other side, or 50.1% and 49.9%. But if you have three candidates on the ballot, you could get somebody elected with 34% of the vote. If you have four candidates on the ballot, you could get somebody elected with 26% of the vote. If you have five candidates on the ballot, you could get somebody elected with 20% of the 21% of the vote, and on it goes. And so as you keep adding political parties, what you're doing is diluting the ability of basically, the parties whose side you're on to govern. And the solution to this was, did not happen until the 1850s. I think it was 1855 or thereabouts that John Stuart Mill wrote On Liberty, the book in which he lays out the idea of proportional representation. That if somebody gets 25% of the vote, or a party gets 25% of the vote, they get 25% of the seats in Parliament. If they get 16% of the vote, they get 16% of the seats. And this is how it works in France or in Israel or in Germany or in the UK or pretty much all over the, well, not the UK actually. The UK is like us. They're kind of anachronistic in that regard. And there's only 7 countries in the world that are stuck with this kind of system, and 2 of them, Australia and New Zealand, have fixed it by going to instant runoff voting. But we're not there with instant runoff voting. So the problem with a third party, and we've got third parties, Doug. You got the Green Party, you got the Libertarian Party, there's a bunch of parties. There's the party that Jesse Ventura ran on back in the day. It's still around. But the problem is that if I vote Green, I'm hurting the Democrats, and if I, and essentially throwing away my vote on top of that. And until we have either proportional representation, which would basically require a constitutional redo, or ranked choice voting, we're going to have this problem. We can't do third parties. So, Doug, I appreciate the call, but and your thoughts. I mean, I love it that people are looking for solutions. That's not the solution, respectfully. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Just a quick question. I'm worried about Social Security and Medicare. The business of giving Medicare for all. It's a nice idea, but I don't know how they're going to achieve it. But would they ever take Social Security away in lieu of Medicare, having Medicare only, and just take away the Social Security? Because we would all suffer if we have no means of, with no means of coming in with money to keep ourselves in running.
Yeah. Well, before Social Security was passed, people over 60, over 65 had a massively high poverty rate, and I mean it was well over half. And one of the principal causes of death for elderly people in the winter was hypothermia, and in the summer was heat stroke. The Social Security solved much of that, along with the development of air conditioning. But Medicare. You say if they can get Medicare for all, as Ro Khanna pointed out on the program earlier today. We are spending every decade $49 trillion on health care, funneling that through for-profit insurance companies that are skimming 20, 30% off the top. And if we ran that through Medicare, which only takes 2 to 3% administrative overhead, just basically what's necessary to run the bureaucracy, if we did that, then with Medicare for all, our expenditures every decade on healthcare would go from $49 trillion down to $32 trillion. Now, somehow we are successfully coming up with that $49 trillion. So we can easily come up with $32 trillion, which is a whole lot less. You just have to reorganize how the money is flowing. But there's some major players who are making billions. I mean, you've got the CEO of United Healthcare has taken over $1 billion himself, and the guy before him, Dollar Bill McGuire, took over $1 billion. Every penny of which was just sucked out of saying to little Johnny, no, you can't have that liver transplant. So we got serious work to do here. Donald, thank you for the call. Soto in Los Angeles. Hey, Soto, what's up?
No, I just want to tell you, we can't listen to the stupid tweets about going to war with Iran. The Russians won't let them. Vladimir will not let us.
I'm not sure. I mean, the amount of the increase in defense spending that Trump asked for this year, just the amount of the increase, which is a little less than $100 billion, is more than the entire military budget of Russia. Just the increase in defense spending is more than the entire military budget of Russia. So, yes, Russia is the second largest nuclear power in the world. But I think that they are going to be very reluctant to use those nuclear weapons. And in every other regard, I mean, they only have one aircraft carrier. In every other regard, the United States is overwhelmingly more powerful. I don't think, I think this, oh my God, we all need to be afraid and run in the other direction from Russia is A, overstated, and B, makes it more difficult for us to actually have good relations with Russia, which would be a good thing. It's physically the largest country in the world, landmass-wise. There's tremendous diversity, huge natural resources. There's a lot, that we could do with Russia. But, and I don't, and to your point with Iran, with the war with Iran, yeah, Russia, China, Great Britain, France, Germany, and the United Nations helped negotiate the Iran deal. So, maybe they would say to Mr. Trump, not a good idea, don't go there. I'd be all in favor of that. But, thanks for the call. Bill in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you doing today?
Good. What's on your mind?
I was listening to the congressman from California this morning on your show, and I'm thinking, why don't we take a page out of the Trump playbook and use big messages but not a bunch of details? Because I think that half of the country they can't handle intellectual arguments, and
I think this is what the Democratic Party is coming to, is that they broadly, more and more Democrats anyway, are campaigning on Medicare for all, free college, public college, free public college, and good jobs, good unionized jobs with a higher minimum wage.
How about middle-class tax cuts? I mean, the big joke.
The problem with that is that Barack Obama passed the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of the United States, and tax cuts don't do anything for working people. Neither do tax increases. They equally don't hurt working people, because employers pay based on take-home pay. If you know that the marketplace for a particular type of labor after taxes is, people will do that. They'll work at McDonald's for $15,000 a year. And in order for them to have $15,000 a year at the end of the day, that you've got to pay them $20,000 because of their tax rate, then you pay them $20,000. If the taxes get raised so that now you got to pay them $25,000 for them to end up with $15,000, the employers will simply raise the wages. And if you go back all the way back to when the income tax was first put into place, which I think was in 1913, or maybe 19, whatever it was, back in the 19-teens, what you'll see is that every time the taxes go up on working people, wages go up. And every time taxes go down on working people, which Reagan did, wages go down. So the tax cuts are only meaningful to really rich people. When tax cuts happen to rich people, they get to keep all that money because they're setting their own pay. But for average working people, tax cuts or tax increases are essentially meaningless. It doesn't make any difference. Bill, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And besides that, as I said, Obama passed the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of the United States, and it really is cutting us close to the bone. Next are benefit cuts. That's where the Republicans are going. And welcome back. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
And thank you for doing what you do. I have a simple technical question for you. I hope you have the answer.
Okay.
Assuming that Paul Ryan, a.k.a. Eddie Munster, becomes the acting U.S. president, in the unlikely event that the Republicans decide to cleverly call for impeachment proceedings and they actually get Trump and Pence out, what happens if then the November election rolls along and enough people rise up and vote to counter any kind of skullduggery in terms of tampering with votes that the Democrats do take over control of the House and Senate? Does the new Democratic leader of the House then become the president, or does Eddie Munster hold on to that power?
Eddie Munster would hold on to that power if the president and vice president were impeached while Paul Ryan was the Speaker of the House. As long as he's Speaker of the House, he's number 3 in secession, or number 2 in secession, because the number 1 slot is preoccupied and pre-dash occupied by the president. So
are you telling me that if the Democrats take over power of the House in November, that then come January, Paul Ryan would have to hand over the gavel, so to speak, to the Democratic
to
leader?
Nancy Pelosi, right? And then if they were to impeach Trump and Pence, and successfully, then you would have Nancy Pelosi become president, effectively reversing the 2016 election.
Well, if that happens, even though I'm no fan of Pelosi, I would love to see Ryan kiss her the way she kissed up to what's-his-face, John Boner, when she handed him that oversized gavel. That would be nice.
Well, she was just being nice. Paul Ryan is, halfway to his new job as a lobbyist for the banks or whatever he's going to do. I mean, I guarantee you his nest is going to be very well feathered. And
do you see the irony, though?
Say that again?
Do you see the irony in this?
What am I missing?
The irony. I mean, it's ironic. Everything about the people in power is ironic.
Yeah.
Okay, you answered my question.
I'll give you that. Okay, thanks a lot. Brad in Spokane, Washington. Hey, Brad, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First time, long time.
Thanks.
I'm reminded of a fable or a logic test my father told me about, where they let people in a room, and they do the mopping, and then the water's coming in, it floods. Nobody ever thinks to turn off the faucet.
Right.
With the hacking, that our voting system is vulnerable in a centipede-like fashion, and every cycle we seem to have another vulnerability that wasn't addressed or we weren't aware of, or the voting machines we didn't give out enough, or some of those kinds of things that seem to happen every cycle. And we raise hay after the fact. Is there a way to get like the voting machine disbursement plan published ahead of time so that we know which districts will have the 7-hour waits? Because I'm tired of the biennial.
I think you can just very simply predict in a state controlled by the Republican Party, those areas that have large numbers of Democratic voters, which would be where there's a lot of elderly people, a lot of college students, a lot of people of color, big cities, those areas you're going to have to wait 6, 7, 8, 9 hours to vote, as long as they control that. And we literally have seen this in every election since 2002, when the Help America Vote Act was passed, and this distribution of voting machines to the states first started, along with the privatization essentially of our elections, which I think was very destructive. But that's Brad, we just need to we need to fix this problem. Brad, thanks for the call. We'll be back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program.
Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. And on the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back.
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Good afternoon, Tom.
It's good afternoon for you. It's good morning for me. So what's going on in the world, Bob?
Sure. Okay. Well, there's a lot going on. Of course, President Trump has, made the Helsinki statement on Russia, then reversed himself and off and now reversed himself again. I think we all know that by today. But on the heels of it, he did put out a tweet where he said, about Mueller, and he calls again, the president does, himself for the end of the probe. And he says, U.S. President, of course, as the sitting president, he's calling again for an end to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe into Russia interference, saying it's been discredited, a disgrace to America. And basically, it's almost like he's saying, almost like an order, that he wants the probe to end. So I think this is on the heels of what we're going to see, which is his refusal, to talk to Mueller. And, of course, as you know, there's immunity granted in 5 cases by the judge today on the Manafort case, which means 5 people will be testifying with immunity. So I think it's kind of all squeezed together. It's a little bit ironic, and at the time that Manafort case gets 5 people, Tom, granted immunity, the president starts down this path. So I think you're just going to see for either him the call to end the probe, period, sort of almost officially, or absolutely just come out and say it's a witch hunt and I am not sitting down with anybody, which is my guess on that.
Yeah, and Fox is backing him up, but rapidly or increasingly, it's just Fox News and right-wing hate radio. Everywhere else, everybody is like, hey, you've got 25 indictments, you got 5 guilty pleas. I mean, it's not like there's no there. Benghazi was investigated to the tune of $74 million for, or whatever it was, for what, 5 years? And
Whitewater and everything else.
Yeah, all these. Yeah.
It's been there. The story really, though, that I'm looking at very intently is the whole Iran story, because you have a couple of things going down, and the pieces I think are falling into place for an ultimate absolute war, which could potentially happen. And it culminates with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Tom, and he was in California at the Reagan Foundation, and he was accusing the Iranian leaders of stealing the country's resources to spread the revolution abroad. And, of course, they're starving their people to do this. Now, why this is a big deal, this was a heavily advertised speech, and it's the biggest, this speech, Tom, yesterday was the biggest installment of the Trump administration's information campaign, because they have pieces of this in order to attempt to destabilize the Iranian government. Right. And also, Pompeo is playing into the hands of the leadership of a group called the MEK, which is led by Mariam Rajavi, who's in Paris. And the reason that's important, the National Association, Iranian American Society, NIAC, and National Iranian American Society boycotted the event based on the fact that, not that they are supporters of the clerics, but based on the fact this is leading up to, obviously, some type of war effort. Now, place in there the National Security Agency advisor, John Bolton, who has publicly called for the nuking of Iran a long time ago, and who met with the MEK, the group I just mentioned, when they were still an official
anti-Iranian terrorist group that used to run work out of Iraq.
Right, Mojahedin Khalq, and they had a camp in Iraq, and they also were the actual ones who took our hostages themselves and were involved in the assassination of Americans. And Bolton met with them when it was actually illegal to, publicly promote some of the issues. But the bottom line is, this is all a case that's being built. And so I think this speech was a bigger deal. Now, what we're looking at, of course, is the fact that the Iranian president did come out after this, President Hassan Rouhani, and he did warn the U.S. that war with Tehran would be, quote, the mother of all wars. And he also said, don't play with the lion's tail because you will regret it eternally. So he did say that, to which President Trump, in his first ever full-caption tweet, from beginning to end, said, never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We're no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. And I think that this is a bigger deal than just a tweet, in response to a tweet.
So how would this play out, Bob? It seems to me that, Bibi Netanyahu is in over his head with his own corruption scandal. Now even his wife, I believe, has been indicted, or they're investigating. A nice little war with Iran would be a great distraction politically. There are also, Israel for a long time has been very frustrated with, very angry at Iran for its support of Hezbollah, which has not been a good player relative to Israel, shall we say. Understatement. So if Netanyahu launched a strike against Iran saying, no, they're not, we discovered a secret nuclear facility or whatever, what happens then? Does then the United States come in? Does then Russia come in? Are we suddenly in a world war? I mean, Russia and China are allied with Iran. We're allied with Israel. Is that where this goes, or am I just going too fast to the crazy?
Oh no, Tom. It would be the mother of all wars. This would be almost a World War III of epic proportions. And you're correct about the assessment of who all is involved with this and promoting this. Absolutely, this is sort of weapons of mass destruction on steroids.
Wow, Congressman Bob Nate. Bob, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by SuperBeets. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. This is right after in the chapter where I lay out how the Supreme Court in 1886 actually did not rule that corporations are persons, even though the clerk of the court wrote that into the head note. And then we get into, where we got with this. This is page 109, the Republican conspiracy theory that empowered FDR. In the early 1930s, the stock market had collapsed and the world was beginning a long and dark slide into the Great Depression and eventually to World War II. Millions were out of work in the United States, and the questions on people's minds were, why did this happen and who's responsible? The teetering towers of wealth created by American industrialists during the late 1800s and early 1900s were largely thought to have contributed to or caused the stock market crash and ensuing depression. In less than 100 years, corporations had gone from being a legal fiction used to establish colleges and trading companies to standing as the single most powerful force in American politics. Many working people felt that corporations had seized control of the country's political agenda, capturing senators, congressmen, the Supreme Court, and even recent presidents in the magnetic force of their great wealth. Proof of this takeover could be found in Supreme Court decisions in the years between 1908 and 1914, when the Supreme Court, often citing corporate personhood, struck down minimum wage laws, workmen's compensation laws, utility regulation, and child labor laws, every kind of law that a people might institute to protect its citizenry from corporate abuse. Unions and union members were the victims of violence from private corporate armies and had been declared criminal conspiracies by both business leaders and politicians. It seemed the corporations had staged a coup, seizing the lives of American workers, the majority of voters, as well as the elected officials who were supposed to represent them. And this was in direct contradiction to the spirit expressed by the founders of our country. It was in this milieu that an American history book, first published in 1927 but largely ignored, suddenly became a hot topic. In The Rise of American Civilization, Columbia University history professor Charles Beard and women's suffragist Mary Beard suggested that the rise of corporations on the American landscape was the result of a grand conspiracy that reached from the boardrooms of the nation's railroads all the way to the Supreme Court. They fingered two Republicans, former Senator and railroad lawyer Roscoe Conkling and former Congressman and railroad lawyer John A. Bingham. The theory, in short form, was that Conkling, when he was part of the Senate committee that wrote the 14th Amendment back in 1868, had intentionally inserted the word person instead of the correct legal phrase natural person to describe who would get the protections of that amendment. Bingham similarly worked in the House of Representatives to get the language passed. Once that time bomb was put into place, Conkling and Bingham left elective office to join in litigating on behalf of the railroads, with the goal of exploding their carefully worded amendment in the face of the Supreme Court. Thus, quote, Republican lawmakers, the Beards said, conspired in advance to give full human constitutional rights to corporate legal fictions. By a few words skillfully chosen, they wrote, every act of every state and local government which touched adversely the rights of corporate persons and property was made subject to review and liable to annulment by the Supreme Court at Washington, D.C. This conspiracy theory was widely accepted because the supposed conspirators themselves had said very publicly, we did it. Earlier, in an 1882 case pitting the railroads against San Mateo County, California, Conkling testified as a paid witness for the railroads that he had slipped the person language into the amendment, the 14th Amendment, to ensure that corporations would one day receive the same civil rights Congress was giving to freed slaves. Bingham made similar assertions when appropriate during his terms as a paid witness for the railroads. As a result of these assertions, through the late years of the 1800s, both of these two men were the well-off darlings of the railroad, basking in the light of their successful appropriation of human rights for corporations. When the Beards' book was widely read in the 1930s, it gave names and faces to the villains who had turned control of America over to what were then called the robber barons of industry. Conkling, Bingham, and Justice Waite were all dead by the time of the Great Depression and all judged guilty by the American people of pulling off the biggest con in the history of our republic. The firestorm of indignation that swept the country helped set the stage for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, using legislative means and packing the Supreme Court to turn back corporate power, and that corporate takeover, at least in part, and returning to average working citizens some of the rights and benefits that they had felt had been stolen from them in that Supreme Court head note in 1886. It was widely accepted that Conkling and Bingham had pulled off this trick successfully, purposefully saying person instead of natural person or citizen when they helped write the 14th Amendment, and corporate personhood was a fait accompli. It was done and couldn't be undone. The Supreme Court, confronted with the reality of the language of the 14th Amendment, had been forced to recognize that corporations were persons under the U.S. Constitution because of the precedent of that 1886 Santa Clara case. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge apparently ratified the coup on January 8, 1915, when he unwittingly promulgated Conkling's myth in a speech to the Senate about the 1882 San Mateo case cited above.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Jason Stanley. He is the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University, the author of 4 books, including his latest, which is due out on 9/11. It's titled How Fascism, which is what an appropriate date for this book, How Fascism Works, the Politics of Us and Them. And it'd help if I click the right button here. Professor Stanley, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being with us. Your book is extraordinary. I read the first chapter, The Mythic Past, for one of our book reports to share with our listeners. Just, in fact, it was just the first couple pages of it. It's really, you've nailed it here. Can we just go through this?
Yes.
So how does fascism start? First of all, how does it work? You call it the politics of us and them. Can you give us a working definition for fascism here?
Well, my book does that with 10, I talk about 10 different properties of fascist politics. But basically, fascism is ultra-nationalist, patriarchal, authoritarian, against public goods of any kind, and forges an us-them distinction using ultra-nationalism and fear of the other, based on their lack of participation in the national community, however you define that.
How is that different from the Tea Party phenomena that was funded by a small group of cranky right-wing billionaires?
Well, the Tea Party phenomenon has strong affiliations with fascism. I would say that the difference would be insofar as libertarians are very careful not to make group generalizations and just say if they just say we are about individual liberty and don't broaden that to say, for instance, that whites are under threat from non-whites, then they avoid fascism, because fascism makes the leap from a certain kind of libertarianism, like life is a struggle, it's all about hard work and who wins, it's all about winners and losers.
Meritocracies.
Yes. It makes a struggle, it makes a move from that to saying that certain groups are winners and other groups are losers. And, I would say that a consistent Tea Party person who wants to avoid being a classical fascist should avoid making generalizations based on group identities. They should avoid patriarchy. They should avoid demanding a return to tradition, to certain national traditions that marginalize other national traditions. So the Tea Party itself was a sort of inconsistent tent, and I think insofar as it's possible, I'd like to bring in some of those members, both committed religious conservatives who would be against some of the hate directed against immigrant groups, as well as libertarians who are committed to rejecting group generalizations like.
Yeah. So let's just go through these. You start out with the mythic past. Tell me about this.
So all fascist movements talk about a mythic past. They talk about in every fascist movement, for instance, India today, the Hindutva movement says back in India's glorious past, it was a pure Hindu nationalism, and we must return the country to that. It's always patriarchal. You're making the country great again. And the thing you have with like Mussolini and Hitler and Alfred Rosenberg, some of the National Socialist ideologists, is they were very explicit that the past was mythic, that the past that they were glorifying never existed. And the idea is to create a sense of nostalgia for a past country that never was, to make the country great again. And there are certain sort of general features of the mythic past. It's always patriarchal. It's always pure. It's always like a certain group. The traditions of a certain group reign supreme. You could say Christmas without hurting anyone's feelings because Christmas was the dominant tradition, as it were. In Hungary, Viktor Orban talks about returning Hungary, to making Hungary great again. So this is a dominant theme of fascism. The idea is to connect, to give people a sense of yearning for a country that never was.
Wow. And then you offer to re-provide that. What about propaganda and anti-intellectualism?
So propaganda, so here's a core example. Every fascist campaign is an anti-corruption campaign. Even though the fascist candidates or fascist parties are often manifestly much more corrupt than their opposition, because democracy is represented as corruption. Because in a democracy, what do? In a democracy, you've got to make lots of concessions. And so you've got to make concessions to different groups. Fascist leaders represent that as corruption.
So a fascist candidate would use phrases like drain the swamp.
Mussolini did.
Yeah, okay. Point made.
I mean, Madeleine Albright makes that. Both Mussolini and the Nazi Party ran anti-corruption campaigns promising to drain the swamp. And of course, our current president, whose business practices were manifestly quite, let's say, dubious, managed to run an anti-corruption campaign.
Yeah.
So by propaganda, I mean as in George Orwell, war is peace.
Mm-hmm.
Using, anti-corruption is used in the service of corruption.
Tell me about victimhood.
So victimhood is what I mean in the chapter on victimhood is in fascist politics always appeals to the traditionally dominant group and tells them they are the real victims.
Even though they're in charge.
Even though they're in charge. And it paints, and of course, many of the people in the dominant group are victims of, say, capitalism, for example, or of certain brutal
like white men are seeing their wages go down.
Exactly. But they're made to feel victims, not of that, but they're made to feel as cultural victims. So their attention is directed away against what's actually victimizing them and towards a kind of cultural victimhood.
So it's a message. It would be like a message to white men that says that your wages are not going down because that's what capitalism does. Your wages are going down because women are coming into the workforce and people of color are coming into the workforce and all those Mexicans flooded across the border.
And also, your cultural traditions are being disrespected. Hitler in Chapter 2 of Mein Kampf talks about my time in Vienna, talks about the theater and the decadent theater and how it wasn't representing true German art. So how the theater, the media is attacked for degenerating the cultural traditions of the dominant group.
Yeah, Nixon and Spiro Agnew ran on a platform of law and order. And I see law and order as one of the characteristics of the emergence in your book of fascist takeover. Was Nixon moving in that direction, or was he just using a catchphrase that worked well for him? And how do you see that happening in contemporary America?
Nixon has a lot of elements of a fascist leader. I'm careful in the book to say you have these 10 properties, and it's a sliding scale. And so Nixon certainly didn't have all. But this is a very powerful way to come to power, is exploiting these mechanisms of fear. And there is no question that Nixon used demagoguery about black Americans. We know from Elizabeth Hinton's work, a recent 2016 book on mass incarceration. Nixon said to Haldeman, the problem is the blacks, and the goal is to construct a system that recognizes that, while concealing that it's doing that.
Right, and with the drug laws.
Yes, the drug laws.
Yeah.
And he said we're going to go after marijuana to get the hippies and heroin to get the blacks.
Right.
So law and order, what law and order means there is that the out-group is always, by their nature, a violation of law and order.
Mm-hmm. So walking while black becomes a crime.
Walking while black becomes a crime, or tellingly, Jeff Sessions said about Donald Trump, you can tell from Mr. Trump's reaction to the Central Park 5 case that he's going to be a law and order president. Now, Mr. Trump, in his reaction to the Central Park 5 case, was to say that perfectly innocent teenagers should still be punished.
Executed, in fact.
So what sense of law and order is meant there? It's certainly not democratic law and order.
Yeah. Your last chapter is Arbeit macht frei, which is the slogan that was over one of the concentration camps. I think it's Dachau.
Auschwitz is over several different
Auschwitz, okay. And it literally means work makes you free. At the same time, Matt Blevins, the new Republican governor of Kentucky, is now trying to associate work rules, work requirements with Medicaid. In other words, basic health care for poor people, women, children in the state of Kentucky. Theoretically to knock, as many as 100,000 people off the rolls to save the state money. But does this tie into a fascist agenda as well?
Absolutely. It's a key element. Hitler decries welfare in Mein Kampf as destroying the economic independence of the nation. But the point there is, at the core of fascism is social Darwinism. Life is a struggle. It should be hard. We should be. So fascist leaders try to say, in struggle, you find meaning. And so you want to make life as hard as possible. But especially, the idea is you want to make life hard for groups that have been supposedly leeching off the state. Under the National Socialists, this was Jews. Jews were using the state to get interest from hardworking Germans via banking. And so Jews were supposedly lazy, and the idea was they needed to be made to work. In that chapter, I talk about how across the world, the outgroup is always represented as lazy.
Remarkable stuff. Professor Jason Stanley, a new book, it'll be out on 9/11. You can pre-order it now. How Fascism Works, the Politics of Us and Them. It's absolutely brilliant. Professor Stanley, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Laura in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Laura, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Good afternoon. I was listening to the program this morning, and we're talking about the midterms coming up and voter suppression, and if you live in a GOP-controlled state. Mm-hmm. Our primary is open, which I'm sure you probably know, but our ballots have always been on separate ballots. When we would go in and vote, we would ask for a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot, and they were separate.
Right.
This year, without notification to anyone, they have now put all parties on the same ballot without letting anybody. Yeah.
Which means that you're going to see a massive increase in what's called spoiled ballots. If somebody votes for one Democrat and one Republican, the entire ballot will be thrown out.
You're right, exactly. And they know that they're faced with the potential in Michigan of a blue wave because legalization of marijuana will be on the midterm ballot. So if they come out and vote in the primary and they have a specific candidate in mind that they want to disrupt, the best way to attack it is to confuse the voters.
Yeah.
So if you have some young voters who have never voted in a primary, because we've seen it happen in 2016 with Bernie and Hillary, not understanding the difference between open primaries, closed primaries, semi-closed, and they getting frustrated because they can't vote. Or they, in this case, now all are on the same ballot. So if they cross over and vote for a Democrat for Congress and vote for a Republican for governor, their entire ballot is gone.
Right. Remarkable. Laura, thanks for the heads up on that. I'm not sure what to do with it, right? This is a done deal, right?
It is a done deal, and unfortunately, they gave no public information. The DNC is trying to get the information out. We're We're sharing it and informing people as much as we can, but this was just another tactic to suppress the vote and invalidate probably quite a few ballots in the primary.
Remarkable. Thanks a lot. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Laura. Yep. Appreciate it. Gary in Louisville, Kentucky. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. I appreciate it. We have earned the hatred of entrenched greed. Does anyone know who said that?
Yeah, Franklin Roosevelt, 1936.
Exactly right. He is exactly right. He's got it figured out. He had it figured out. And now history, and tell me if I'm wrong about this. You know, I'll be 73 in September. I'm very glad to be a member of the plan. I'm very lucky. But I went through Watergate. I've seen greed. I've seen it back and forth. I haven't been an angel all my life, but I'll tell you what, they got me beat by a mile. We don't really have a healthy, functioning democracy. America's for sale, people. If nobody believes that, just read the report out today, and I know you're aware of it. Sheldon Adelson gave $30 million, and it's basically both parties, but more the reputes. I call them the reputes. Both parties. You know, I'm still somewhat hopeful, Tom. I really am.
I'm still very hopeful, Gary. But on that note, we're going to have to wrap this up. Gary, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So this is crazy stuff, right? This is just absolutely crazy stuff. I tweeted out over the weekend, pay careful attention. When Trump criticizes the Fed, actually, first, Donald Trump tweeted. And he's tweeted, the United States should not be penalized because we're doing so well. Tightening now hurts all that we have done. Okay? So by tightening, he's talking about the Fed raising interest rates. No president has ever publicly said this. We know now from the presidential library that Lyndon Johnson, not only got in a fight with the chairman of the Fed, but lifted him up by his lapels and slammed him up against the wall. But the guy still didn't cut interest rates like Lyndon Johnson wanted. Trump was blaming Janet Yellen throughout the last couple of years of Obama's presidency that her low interest rates were keeping Obama afloat in the polls by keeping the economy good. And now he's squealing that, they want to raise interest rates. It's going to hurt the economy. But so my tweet was, pay careful attention. So Trump tweets, bad to raise interest rates. I tweeted, pay careful attention. When Trump criticizes the Fed for raising/normalizing interest rates, what he is really saying is, I have just learned that a bad recession is coming, and I'm pre-blaming it on the Fed instead of on the GOP tax scam and my useless leadership. So, Trump at least is he's not lying in that one. But when Carter Page, when they released this FISA memo about Carter Page, this FISA warrant, this is really extraordinary. In the warrant that they released, it explicitly points out that the FBI was asking to surveil Carter Page after he had left the Trump campaign, and that it had nothing to do with the dodgy dossier, right? The Christopher Steele dossier. Instead, it was because of his contacts with Russian intelligence and this, that, and the other thing, and went to Russia. He was doing business there, that kind of thing. So Trump then and Devin Nunes both now put out statements saying, see, this release of this FISA warrant proves that the whole Carter Page thing was part of this witch hunt. I mean, in other words, the release of the warrant proves that Trump and Nunes have been lying. And Trump and Nunes then both come out and say, see, proved that we were telling the truth. This is what Franklin Roosevelt had to say about this.
Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood. Always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
This is the fascist technique of propaganda. Repeat a big lie over and over and over again. And Trump did that this morning again. In fact, he's just coming right out and lying about it. He says, as usual, they are ridiculously heavy. They confirm with little doubt the Department of Justice and FBI misled the courts. Witch hunt, rigged, a scam. No. And then he comes out, you can look up his tweets. Every single one of them is a lie. This is the President of the United States, my friends. This is terrible.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's not like, do we have to worry about going in a fascist direction? We are headed in that direction. The question is, how far down that road are we going to go before it stops?
We're reading today from the Thom Hartmann Reader here at Thom Hartmann University. This is from page 13. The title is The Story of Carl. Carl loved books and he loved history. After spending 2 years in the Army as part of the American occupation forces in Japan immediately after World War II, Carl was hoping to graduate from college and teach history, perhaps even at the university level, if he could just hang on to the GI Bill and his day job long enough to get his PhD. But in 1950, when he'd been married just a few months, the surprise came that forced him to drop out of college. His wife was pregnant with their first child. This was an era when husbands worked, wives tended the home, and being a good father and provider was one of the highest callings to which a man could aspire. Carl dropped out of school, kept his 9-to-5 job at a camera shop, got a second job at a metal fabricating plant, working with molten metal from activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother, and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: we, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other. In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, than watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties. The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part, because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. We have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam, known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Nancy in Minneapolis. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hey, so I'm a election judge here in Minnesota, and we do with our primaries we do have all the parties on one ballot.
Just like Michigan just said that they're going to start doing with this election.
Yeah. But so if people cross parties, the counter kicks out that ballot, and then we give them a new ballot to do it again, so that they just stay in one party.
So you catch it on the fly. You don't have spoiled ballots
Correct.
as a result of this. Oh, interesting. Because
Right.
the caller from Michigan was saying essentially they're trying to suppress the vote or trying to mess with the vote in Michigan, and so we have open primaries, but we're going to put all the Republicans and Democrats both on the same piece of paper. And of course, if a person votes for a Republican in the primary for governor and a Democrat in the primary for U.S. Senate, then that's a spoiled ballot. It can't be counted because you're voting in two different parties' primaries. So you guys catch it on the fly at the time.
Right. Except if you're doing absentee balloting and you're mailing it in, and then the person's not there to
Does it make it very clear, like this side is Republican, this side is Democratic, you must pick one? And okay, good.
Yes, yeah, and we tell people that when they take their ballots, we explain they have to stay in one party. You just pick from one side or the other. Or, sometimes we have three parties. So yeah, and the counter checks it. So if they cross over, it kicks it back out, and they get a new ballot.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you for that, Nancy. I appreciate the information. It's and nice to hear from you. Thank you. Marlene in Perry, Ohio. Hey, Marlene, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom.
Hi, Marlene.
Yes, hello. Two questions about Medicare. Because Medicare pays for yearly wellness exams, but it doesn't include dental care, and dental care can lead to a lot of physical problems, including pneumonia.
Including heart disease.
Right. Yeah. I was always curious, and maybe it's because in the beginning people didn't live that long, and they usually had dentures, but I wish dental care would be added.
I agree. I agree. One of the things that blew my mind and Louise's when we were in Cuba a while ago with the Code Pink delegation was that, or tour or whatever they called it, was that even the poorest people in the most rural parts of Cuba, the schizophrenic beggar out in front of the free market, the marketplace, where people could sell their stuff, everybody had perfect teeth. Everybody had perfect teeth in Cuba, because dental is considered part of healthcare, and so and everybody had, who needed glasses had glasses, for free. And that we should be doing that here in the United States. Marlene, that's an excellent point. Thank you so much for calling and making it. I appreciate that. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I generally agree with everything you said, regarding Iran and President Trump's tweet. The only thing I would like to add for consideration is this window of opportunity for attacking Iran is closing. There's a variety of reasons why I think this is, but Donald Trump gave out the classified number for the expense of the Iraq war. He brought John Bolton into his cabinet, and Bolton, I think, is, I don't want to accidentally place all the blame on Bolton, because I'm not sure, but I know Bolton can make a convincing case to where, with the amount that we've spent, continuing the operation into Iran while we essentially have the country surrounded is financially beneficial in the long run. You can make that case.
Right.
And I believe what's going to happen is more than likely Iran, because Trump said, or not Trump, but Pompeo said that we're going to try to get Iran down to 0% oil exports. That really caught my attention.
Yeah. I
imagine Iran's going to close the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz and Persian Gulf.
Yeah, they have already threatened that, and they, by the way, they did that back in the 80s and the 90s, and or was it the 70s and the 80s? In both cases, I mean, that was part of the Arab oil boycott, and that produced 16% interest rates here in the United States, massive inflation because the cost of oil jacked up so high.
Well, yeah, and what this will do is this will get, sort of an international coalition against Iran. But I can almost guarantee, well, no, I can guarantee you Russia is really going to, if they supersize in Syria, they're going to megasize in Iran. I don't know what the ultimate outcome of that will be, but, if we go back to some sort of troglodytic existence, I will remember you, Tom, and I'll tell your stories around the fireplace.
Okay. Dave, thank you. God forbid, right? But I absolutely understand what you're saying. Thanks a lot for the call. Mark in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's really great to hear from you. It's been a long time. I retired from the environmental work that I was doing, and I used to call into you. But what I wanted to discuss today was bring up to you. Are you familiar with author Alan Furst, F-U-R-S-T?
I don't think so.
He's written some really brilliant espionage novels linking up to World War II. Particularly, you should look at Mission to Paris. It details what the Ribbentrop Bureau in Germany was doing to defeat France, along with the right wing in France. Mm-hmm. And it has parallels to, I think, what Russia was trying to do with us. And this stuff's been going on for
Mark,
a long time.
without my going out, buying the book and reading it, or, everybody else doing the same, and we'll take it that First's Mission to Paris is a good book. Can you summarize real quickly for us exactly what the scenario was? This is a novel grounded in actual history, I'm assuming.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and there are real people that he based his stories on. There's several others, The Spies of Warsaw, The Spies of the Balkans, they're wonderful reads, so I hope you might take a look at them. But the Ribbentrop Bureau was the outreach into foreign countries where they were trying to destabilize, people that were working against them.
On behalf of Hitler's Nazi regime.
Yeah. The Gestapo worked within Germany, but the Ribbentrop Bureau worked outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so they worked with the French right wing to overthrow the left. They considered democracy as being the same thing as socialism and communism, and they were going to destroy it and destroy France's ability to fight. And it worked.
What was their sales pitch to the French people?
France was divided. France in 1936 elected a socialist, Leon Blum, and the right wing, pulled him out of a car and almost beat him to death. Then they, worked, the country was divided, kind of like our country is now. And there's some interesting parallels, so I'm hoping you might take a look at it. They're wonderful reads, and I would leave you with this one thing. The 8 scariest words in the English language are, I'm Ronald Reagan, and I'm here to help.
Right. Okay. Well said. Thanks a lot, Mark. I appreciate the call. And Chris in Chicago. Hey, Chris, thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Oh, hi, Mark. No, I heard you say earlier that we're the #1 nuclear power in the world. Actually, as far as the almanac says that the Russians are, but you're including nuclear power plants, right?
No. My understanding was that we had more nuclear tonnage, deliverable nuclear tonnage, than any other country in the world. With regard to actual numbers of missiles, I haven't been keeping track of that for quite some time now that we've got, these tactical battlefield nukes that we're developing. I don't know what Russia's doing in that regard, but whether we're #1 or they're #1, in either case, that's pretty scary stuff. If we decided to have a war with each other.
Yeah, I know. Right now, total missiles between the two countries is 26,000.
Wow.
Now that's total amount of missiles. The ones that they can use on the spur of the moment is much less.
Yeah.
But it's enough to incinerate us.
Yeah. Welcome to nuclear winter and everything else.
Hey, let me ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't a nuclear war be better than global warming?
No. And we've got to fix global warming. Yeah, Chris, thanks a lot for the call, but definitely not. Dennis in Michigan. Hey, Dennis, you wanted to talk about voting in Michigan?
Yeah, I just got done with training for the primary that's coming up.
So you're going to be an election official?
Pardon?
You're going to be an election official?
Well, I'm going to work it. I don't know if you'd call it official.
Yeah, you're going to help out with the elections.
Those machines will tell you if you've done something wrong on the ballot, and will at least ask you, do you want me to accept it or not? Otherwise, if it can't even read, like they didn't fill out the bubble sufficiently, it will kick it back out.
Okay. So that's a good thing in your mind, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
I mean, if they know they made a mistake and they say go ahead anyway, then that's on the voter.
Yeah. If it says go ahead anyway. Dennis, thanks for that information. I appreciate it. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM and calling into the program. We'll be back. We'll continue our conversation. Your calls, my thoughts, the news of the day, and there's a lot of news of the day. It's interesting. Craig Calcaterra tweets about Donald Trump's tweets. He says, my parents are elderly. If they were tweeting like this, I'd seek medical or mental health intervention.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Trump has lurched from shouted threats of violence to what's on TV to paranoia, all without so much as a night's sleep in between. Amen. And welcome back. Mary in Scottsdale, Arizona. Hey, Mary, thanks for calling. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to say that Bernie would be adding dental care and eye care as part of his Medicare for All package.
And mental health care as well.
And mental health care. That would be wonderful. We need to get people out, vote for Bernie. I just had my teeth done, and it costs a lot of money, and people need help. And if they keep voting for just Democrats and not voting for progressives, we're never going to get anywhere, because the Democrats are not for we the people. The Democrats want to make more money, and they want to ignore us. Bernie wants to help us. He's been fighting for us forever.
Yeah, it's not just Bernie, though, Mary. I mean, there's a whole, you could call them Bernie-crats, but I think that even too narrowly circumscribes the group. I mean, we're talking about progressive Democrats or democratic socialists, or you could, I think the words are frankly interchangeable, although I realize a lot of Democrats are afraid of the socialism word, particularly older ones who remember, you know, the USS, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. But this is, and I see it happening, and you know, but in the meantime, I mean, if I lived in a district where I had a choice between voting for a Joe Crowley corporate kind of Democrat or a Republican of any variety, I would vote for the Democrat, because the most important vote that elected representative is going to make is on the first day of the new session in Congress, when they vote for who's going to be the Speaker of the House, or who's going to be the majority leader in the Senate. And you know, we need to have a Democratic majority, even if it's made up of, you know, a couple of dozen blue dogs or yellow dogs or whatever.
Well,
you know,
we have a choice in Arizona. We have a wonderful progressive named Deidre, and she is running against Kirsten Sinema, who votes 50% of the time with Trump, who took $1.3 million for the Dodd-Frank bill to vote with that on Trump. So I have a choice between voting for Sinema or voting for Deidre. Well, in the primaries, of course, I'm going to vote Deidre. But then when Sinema wins, because she's leading most of the Republicans, she's up against Joe Arpaio. So I feel I have to vote for Sinema, even though I know she's as bad as voting for a Republican. And
well, but that's the thing. It's not as bad. You know, it's a sad state of affairs when we have to sit here and parse. Okay, is this terrible or only somewhat bad? Or, you know, whatever, but it's at least not as bad, Mary.
Well, it depends. I mean, the way she votes, it is as bad in Arizona, and hopefully she will win, I guess.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is, though. I would rather not vote than have to vote for her. I feel like.
But she's a Democrat, right?
She says she's a Democrat.
Okay, and this is for the U.S. House of Representatives?
Pardon me?
This is for the U.S. House of Representatives, or is this for the State House?
She's going for Senate. No. She's running for John Flake's seat.
Oh, interesting, for Jeff Flake's seat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then we have Kelly Ward, another good.
Yeah.
Another Republican.
I don't care, you know, what her policies are. Frankly, if we can, you know, the Democratic Party can tolerate having a few, you know, Joe Lieberman types in its caucus. We need to figure, you know, we need to get over 50 votes in the Senate. So because right now we've got no power. Okay, Mary, I'm glad you know. Mary, thanks so much for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV there in Scottsdale. I appreciate it. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, Thom Hartmann here. Here's what you... The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Ernest in Corvallis, New Mexico. Hey, Ernest, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I have a friend that moved here from Arizona, And when he lived in Arizona, his father had a cattle ranch up in the mountains, and he was a Republican. So what he did was he would have barbecues to raise money for Republicans. And my friend was about 17 or 18 at that time, and he says he became a Democrat because he got tired listening to those people like Barry Goldwater and his cohorts describe how they were going to steal this and steal that when they got into power. And so he became a Democrat.
Remarkable.
One more thing.
Mm-hmm.
I also read a book about New Mexico. It's called the Santa Fe Ring.
Mm-hmm.
And these were people that in the 1840s, 1848, 49, after New Mexico became part of the United States,
right?
There was this group of politicians and lawyers and stuff like that, and they would scheme on how they were going to steal the land from the people, the Hispanic people in New Mexico. And guess what? They were all Republicans.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, Ryan Zinke just got busted for this. The Washington Post has an article, in fact, it was breaking news about 3 hours ago, about how there was an accidental dump of a whole bunch of emails from Ryan Zinke's office, the Secretary of the Interior, about how they were going to completely ignore how Americans loved their national parks, how Americans what percentage of Americans use the national parks, how the national parks generate revenue, how all the benefits and values of national parks. They were going to delete all that, and they did, by the way, delete all that information from the public comments that they were going to put out as they were cutting up our national monuments and our public parks and turning them over to their oil and billionaire buddies. So this is nothing new, Ernest, but it's a great point.
No, it's not. I just thought I thought it might be interesting. The anecdotes might seem interesting to somebody.
You're right, and they were. Thank you. And it was a great stepping off point to talk about what Ryan Zinke is up to. Curtis in Phoenix, Arizona, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Curtis, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, listen, I really respect your opinion. And I was wondering, I was just looking at Russia's economy over the last 10 years, and from what I'm looking at, it seems like the sanctions got their economy down to about the size of metropolitan New York. And I don't understand, with such a small economy, how can they compare with the kind of money we're spending on the military and our large economy as far as being a world power? That's the first question.
Well, let me answer the first question first, okay? Number one, they have about the same number of nuclear weapons we do, and that's the parity that ultimately matters for the Earth. The entire Russian defense budget is about the same size as the increase in our defense budget that Donald Trump asked for in the last budget. Militarily, they're not our equal. But in terms of nuclear war, they certainly are, and that gets them a lot. Back to you.
Okay, the other thing is I have a little small rinky-dink website that's only targeting the United States citizens, and I block out all countries outside of the United States. Why we can't block out the .ru domains and cut this crap out if it's such a problem?
You're talking about the trolls on Facebook and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, any traffic that's coming from Russia, why we can't just block it out?
You're right. You can do domain-specific deletes, although probably then they would just VPN into a different country and come from there. But I think that this is an issue. These are the kind of things where you want, and Curtis, thank you for the call, where you want to have a president who is actually in dialogue with the president of another country. You want Donald Trump to be talking to Vladimir Putin to work out stuff like this. Unfortunately, Trump just can't do it right. I mean, this is the big problem I see is that Donald Trump doesn't know, he's incompetent. And so he's like, I'll go over there, we'll talk about this in private, and we'll get all this straight. No. You have your people work the details out. You come up with a punch list of things that you want to accomplish. You identify your goals before you go into it. I guarantee you that's what Putin did, and it's apparently not at all what Trump did, tragically. Jonathan in Daytona Beach. Jonathan, we have 1 minute left. What's up?
How you doing, sir? I was calling because maybe you can help me with this, but I'm trying to figure out what has the Democratic Party done for Black Americans.
How about passing the Voting Rights Act?
as a starting point?
See, I feel like we're still stuck in 1964, and that's my biggest issue. I feel like the Democratic Party wants Black Americans to stay stuck in 1964 when everyone else comes over to this country and reap the benefits of the blood, sweat, and
Have you
tears
looked at the racial profile of the Republican caucus, Jonathan? I mean, I'm assuming that you're not a Republican troll trying to just troll me here.
No, I'm not.
But the Republicans have got like what, one black guy in all of Congress? You know, Tim.
I'm not a Republican. I'm a Black American.
No, I get that. But what have the Democrats done for me? Come on, it's the party of inclusion. It's the party that is saying we're here for all Americans, not just the white supremacists. That seems to me like a hell of a good starting point. Thanks so much for being with us today. What an amazing day, an amazing news day. We will continue our conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. We can't just sit on our hands. We've got to get out there. We've got to show up in tidal wave proportions this November. The voter suppression is full tilt boogie. They've already knocked over 10 million people off the voting rolls in the last 10 years. Get out there, get active, get registered, get your friends, tag, you're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairthom.com.